There is a doctor in Chicago making $380,000 a year. On paper, she looks rich. She drives a leased BMW. Her children go to private school. She eats out most weeknights. Her mortgage is $4,200 a month. She earns more in a month than many families earn in half a year. And yet if I asked her for $5,000 in cash by Friday, she would have to move money around, sell something, or borrow it. Most people hear a story like that and assume the problem must be stupidity. It usually is not. It is something much more dangerous than stupidity. It is a trap that disguises itself as success. And if you do not understand this trap, you can spend your entire working life climbing toward an income level that never gives you the freedom you thought it would. That is why I want to say something that will offend the wrong people and rescue the right ones. A high income does not make you rich. A high income only gives you the ability to become rich. Those are not the same thing. In America, millions of people have confused the two. They make more, they finance more, they upgrade more, they commit more, and then they wake up in their 50s with a arfe-sumfe that looks powerful, a house full of expensive proof, and a balance sheet that still looks fragile. They are rich on paper and broke in reality. The assumption people carry is simple: cross 6 figures and the anxiety fades, cross $200,000 and now you are secure, cross $500,000 and money stops mattering. But the data tells a much uglier story. In 2025, a Goldman Sachs report found that 41% of Americans earning between $300,000 and $500,000 were living paycheck to paycheck. Among those earning over $500,000, about 40% said the same thing. Think about how absurd that is. These are not people making minimum wage. These are not people who never had a chance. These are people earning what most households dream about, and they still feel one interruption away from discomfort. That should tell you something very important. Income is not the cure most people think it is. If you do not build the habit of keeping money, more income simply gives you more ways to lose it. I have watched this misunderstanding ruin more financial futures than bad stock picks ever did, because a bad stock pick hurts once, a bad lifestyle hurts every month, and the lifestyle pain is harder to diagnose because it arrives dressed as normal life. It comes as the nicer house, the better neighborhood, the second car, the school everyone else is talking about, the dinners that feel deserved, the memberships that signal you have arrived, the vacations that prove to the world you are doing well. Every single choice feels reasonable on its own. That is how the machine works. It never asks you to make one ridiculous decision. It only asks you to make 12 reasonable ones. Then it bolts them together into a life that consumes your whole income. That is what I call the high-income poverty machine. It takes a raise at the top, runs it through status, convenience, and fixed commitments, and spits out the same anxiety people expected the raise to eliminate. This machine has a few parts, and if you want to escape it, you need to see them clearly. The first part is what I call the income mirage. An income mirage is when the size of the paycheck creates the illusion of financial strength, even when the underlying structure is weak. This is why high earners fool themselves so easily. A person earning $350,000 looks at their gross income and feels powerful. They think, how could I possibly be in danger? I make too much money for that. But danger does not care what you make. Danger cares what you have left after the obligations arrive. If you earn $350,000 in every month, you spend like a person who believes $350,000 is permanent, stable, and guaranteed. Then your income has not created safety. It has only funded a larger set of assumptions. And assumptions are the most expensive things people own. The doctor in Chicago is not poor because she lacks earning power. She is poor in the only way that matters psychologically. She has no margin. A wealthy person has margin. A wealthy person can absorb a surprise, a pause, a downturn, a bad year, a change of mind, a career shift, a medical event, a market panic. A person without margin cannot. They may have a beautiful house and a very impressive car parked in the driveway, but if every major decision in their life has already been pre-spent, they do not own their lifestyle. Their lifestyle owns them. That is why some people with enormous salaries feel the same tightness in their chest as someone making a fraction of the money. The numbers are bigger, but the fragility is the same. The second part of the machine is what I call fixed cost gravity. This is where the trap gets serious, when lower income households get into trouble. The problem is obvious. The paycheck is not large enough to support basic living. When higher income households get into trouble, the problem is often hidden inside respectable obligations. Housing is the biggest one. A family earning $80,000 might spend $2,000 a month on housing. A family earning $300,000 might spend $8,000. The richer family tells itself a comforting story. We make more, so of course we spend more. And that is true. What they do not say is the more important part. We also gave ourselves the exact same lack of flexibility, just with nicer countertops. This is what people miss. You can scale your income and still never scale your freedom. You just get more expensive handcuffs. The same thing happens with cars. When someone making $50,000 leases something they cannot afford, everyone sees the mistake. When someone making $400,000 leases a BMW, finances an SUV, and normalizes 2 luxury payments, because the monthly number looks manageable, society calls it success. But I do not care what society calls it. I care what it does to your balance sheet. A payment is a payment. Whether it arrives wearing a luxury badge or not, it still claims your future income before you do, and once the fixed costs stack high enough, the whole household becomes a hostage to continuity. That is the real damage. You stop making choices based on what is wise. You start making choices based on what must be maintained. That changes a person. It changes how long they stay in jobs they dislike. It changes how much risk they can take. It changes how honestly they can deal with setbacks. It changes how much market volatility they can tolerate. It changes whether they can say no. And I have spent enough of my life studying wealth to tell you something most people do not want to hear. The ability to say no is one of the purest forms of wealth in existence. The third part of the machine is the status tax. This one is lethal because it is emotional rather than mathematical. The status tax is what you pay to look successful in front of people who are usually trying to look successful in front of you. It is not a tax the government imposes. It is a tax insecurity imposes. A bigger house than you need. A wardrobe priced for your ego rather than your utility. A school chosen partly for education and partly for social signaling. Vacations that are less about restoration and more about evidence. A country club you barely use. A second home that mostly generates maintenance, taxes, and guilt. None of these things are automatically foolish. That is not my argument. My argument is that too many people never consciously chose them. They drifted into them. They accumulated a lifestyle, one socially approved decision at a time, and by the time they looked up, the machine had already assigned their income to every corner of their identity. That is why backing out feels painful. Downgrading the car feels like decline. Selling the vacation house feels like failure. Moving the children to a different school feels like public humiliation. Cooking at home feels like regression. Suddenly ordinary life feels emotionally unavailable, even when it is financially sensible. That is why the trap tightens. The money problem becomes an identity problem, and identity problems are always harder to solve. The fourth part of the machine is convenience bleed. This is where high earners quietly die, the death of 1,000 cuts, food delivery, ride shares, streaming stacks, premium apps, monthly memberships, subscriptions nobody uses. Convenience purchases that are too small to create guilt and too frequent to stay small. When people picture financial collapse, they imagine dramatic disasters. I have seen far more fortunes weakened by comfort spending than by catastrophe, because catastrophe at least gets your attention. Convenience does not. Convenience smiles, charges the card, and renews automatically. One report in 2025 showed food delivery spending up more than 10% year over year. Streaming spending rose, ride. Share spending rose. Each category looked small enough to ignore. That is why they matter. Anything small enough to ignore and permanent enough to recur becomes dangerous. For the average household, these leaks add up to a few $1,000s. For a higher income household, the numbers get even larger, because the premium version becomes the default version. First class instead of economy, hotels instead of practical rentals, restaurant dinners instead of groceries, housekeeping instead of household systems, assistance for every inconvenience. Soon, every problem is solved by spending, and because income is high, nobody interrupts the pattern. But when every inconvenience has a price tag attached to it, your income stops building wealth and starts renting ease. Ease feels good. Wealth lasts longer. The fifth part of the machine is the moving goalpost. This one destroys peace of mind, even in people who are objectively doing well. One survey in 2025 showed that Americans believed you needed $2.3 million to be considered wealthy. To feel financially comfortable, the figure was around $839,000. Now compare those numbers to the median net worth of an American household, about $193,000. Do you see the damage? People are not chasing a fixed target. They are chasing a target that retreats every time they approach it. This is what I mean when I say that many high earners do not feel rich even while earning rich incomes, because rich is no longer a number. It is a moving social impression. And if your internal definition of enough depends on what the next neighborhood, the next city, the next peer group, or the next social media feed is doing, you will never arrive. Someone builds $500,000 and says, that is not enough. They build $1 million and say, that is not what wealthy means anymore. They build more and keep feeling behind because their comparisons live in an environment where everyone curates the evidence and hides the debt. This is how you get people earning top-tier salaries and still feeling financially inadequate. They are not comparing themselves to reality, they are comparing themselves to theater. The sixth part of the machine is underaccumulation. This is the quiet accounting truth beneath all the psychology. The authors of The Millionaire Next Door used a formula that I still think is useful because it cuts through vanity fast. Multiply your age by your pre-tax household income and divide by 10. That gives you a rough estimate of what your net worth should be. A 50-year-old earning $250,000 should have around $1.25 million. That ain't a lowly scripture, but it is a useful mirror because most high earners who look affluent fail that test badly. They are what the authors called underaccumulators of wealth. They have high earning power and low conversion. They can make money, but they do not keep enough of it long enough. And that is the difference between a person who impresses the market and a person who outlives it. The plumber driving a 10-year-old truck with $2 million invested is not pretending. The surgeon with a luxury car, private school bills, club dues, and a net worth that lags their age. Income benchmark is one looks ordinary and is wealthy. The other looks wealthy and is ordinary. That distinction matters more than almost anything in personal finance research. On actual millionaires has always been uncomfortable for people addicted to appearances. Most millionaires do not look the part. Most live in middle-class neighborhoods. Most do not buy flashy clothes. Many drive practical cars. A surprising number never spent more than a few $100s on a single article of clothing. Warren Buffett, for all the jokes people make about it, still lives in the same house he bought in 1958. That is not because he lacks options. It is because he understands a principle that the high-income poverty machine teaches people to forget. You do not need every visible upgrade just because you can afford it. And if you spend long enough proving to other people that you are doing well, you will eventually discover that the proof consumed the capital that would have made it true. Now let me show you what the trap does over time, because that is where the pain becomes undeniable. Imagine two people. They each earn $300,000 a year. The first saves 30%, the second saves 5%. The first person invests $90,000 a year. The second invests $15,000. Give both of them 20 years and a 7% annual return. The first ends up with around $4 million. The second ends up with something closer to $650,000. Same income, completely different life. The difference is not talent. It is not intelligence. It is not luck. It is not access. It is the percentage of income each person refused to let the machine consume. That gap, about $3.35 million, is not abstract. That is the price of the trap over 2 decades. And the cruel part is that many people do not even notice what they are paying until the compounding window has narrowed. Time matters more than drama. A person making $300,000 and saving almost nothing from age 35 to 50 does more damage to their future than a person making $90,000 and saving aggressively over the same period, because compounding is indifferent to your excuses. It only responds to capital and time. That is why the trap is so devastating for high earners. It robs them of the years in which their income could have built a foundation. Instead, it uses those years to build a costume. Now let me say something important before I tell you how to break it. The answer is not misery. The answer is not pretending. Money does not matter. The answer is not living like a monk. The answer is not shaming ambition. The answer is not that private school is always wrong, or restaurants are always foolish, or a nice house is always a mistake. That kind of thinking is too childish for the real world. The real question is simpler and harsher. Did you choose this spending intentionally, or did you inherit it from the expectations of your income bracket? That is the dividing line. Intentional spending can still be expensive, but intentional spending knows what it is sacrificing. Unintentional spending always claims to be necessary, and that lie is how the machine survives. If you want to break this trap, you have to become something most high earners never become. You have to become an accumulator, not an earner, not an image, not a lifestyle manager, an accumulator. An accumulator understands one rule above all others. The number that changes your life is not your income. It is your savings rate. If I handed you a $100,000 raise tomorrow and your lifestyle consumed $95,000 of it, your life would barely change. You would feel wealthier, look wealthier, and remain fragile. If I handed you a plan that raised your savings rate from 5 to 25% without changing your income, your life would change radically. Not because it would feel glamorous, because it would start buying back your future. That is the first shift. You stop optimizing for visible lifestyle and start optimizing for invisible accumulation. The second shift is that you have to audit fixed cost with brutality. Not emotion, not ego, not nostalgia, brutality. What does the house actually cost? Not just the mortgage, the taxes, insurance, upkeep, furnishings, and the labor required to maintain the image of that house. What do the cars cost? Not just the monthly payment, the depreciation, insurance, financing, fuel, repairs, and the opportunity cost of capital tied up in transportation that exists partly to communicate identity. What does the school cost? What does the club cost? What does the vacation home cost? What does the recurring family standard cost? What does convenience cost? Not in 1 month, in 10 years, because that is the correct horizon. Poor financial decisions are often decisions examined over too short a period. The third shift is you automate accumulation before life gets its turn. If you save what is left after spending, you will always have a beautiful theory and a disappointing result. You must reverse the order. Someone making $400,000 who automatically sends $120,000 a year into investments will build wealth almost whether they want to or not. They can still live very well on what remains. They simply cannot pretend that every raise belongs to the machine. This is how real wealth is built. Not by waiting until discipline feels natural, by forcing structure before desire gets a vote. The fourth shift is selective frugality. This is where actual millionaires differ from high-income underaccumulators. They do not necessarily spend less on everything. They spend deliberately. They may spend heavily on what they genuinely value and cut hard everywhere else. A person may love travel and not care about cars. Fine, spend on travel. A person may care deeply about education and not care about status brands. Fine, spend on education. A person may want one beautiful home and no appetite for a second one. Fine, the point is not austerity. The point is clarity. Every dollar must know why it is leaving. And if the reason is because people like me usually do this, you are not spending from conviction. You are spending from drift. Drift is expensive. The fifth shift is emotional. You must learn to tolerate looking less rich than you are becoming. That sentence is so important, I want you to sit with it. You must learn to tolerate looking less rich than you are becoming. Most people cannot do this. That is why the trap keeps winning. They want visible proof too early. They want their income to be translated into evidence. The better car, the more impressive house, the smoother vacations, the upgraded routine. But wealth does not begin as evidence. It begins as restraint. It begins as assets nobody praises you for. It begins as brokerage statements, retirement accounts, business equity, and low dependence. It begins as optionality. The people who master money are often willing to endure years of being underestimated. The people who get trapped by money are often desperate to end that underestimation immediately. That impatience is expensive. The sixth shift is philosophical. You have to stop worshiping income and start worshiping freedom. Income is only a tool. Freedom is the outcome. A person earning $150,000 with a strong balance sheet, low fixed costs, and consistent investing is often wealthier in the deepest sense than a person earning $500,000 whose life requires the next paycheck, because the first person owns their future. The second person rents theirs at a premium. That is the truth hidden inside all of this. The trap does not care how intelligent you are. It does not care how prestigious your job is. It does not care what you post, what neighborhood you live in, or what logo is on the steering wheel. It only cares whether you built margin or replaced it with maintenance. That is all, and this is why more income was never the answer by itself. People keep saying, if I could just make more, all of this would settle down. Sometimes that is true at the low end of the income ladder. I will never insult reality by denying that. But past a certain point, the game changes. Then the question is no longer whether you can survive. The question becomes whether you can resist turning every new dollar into a new fixed obligation. That is the adult version of wealth building. Not getting more, keeping more, not upgrading faster, accumulating faster, not looking expensive, becoming independent. So here is the test. Not for the doctor in Chicago, for you. If your income doubled next year, what portion of it would the machine get before you noticed? Would the house expand? Would the cars improve? Would the vacations escalate? Would the subscriptions multiply? Would the convenience spending drift upward until it became invisible again? Would the standard of normal rise so quickly that your new income produced almost no new freedom? If the answer is yes, then more income will not rescue you. It will only hide the problem better. And that is what makes the high-income poverty trap so dangerous. It lets people feel successful while staying fragile. It flatters them while it empties them. It gives them the appearance of arrival while stealing the very margin that arrival was supposed to create. The good news is that the trap is breakable, but only if you are willing to make one decision that most people avoid for decades. You have to decide that being wealthy matters more than looking wealthy. That is the whole fork in the road. One path buys applause, the other path buys time, peace, options, and eventually real power. One path builds a lifestyle that must be defended. The other builds a balance sheet that defends you. One ends with a polished life and quiet panic. The other ends with a simpler story and genuine freedom. And if you are honest, you already know which one compounds better. The question is whether you are ready to stop feeding the machine and start building the margin that actually turns income into wealth.